In today's video, we'll talk about the plotline Queer Seduction as a Game Plan, aka gays seducing other gays with an alternative motive. What does this specific way of portraying queerness look like in contemporary media? How is this portrayed and who is allowed to do it? This kind of action, in itself, goes under many names if we are talking tropes. Sleeping their way to the top, sex for services, honey trap, and so on. But those are, to a very high degree, women who sleep with men to achieve something else. I wanted to understand how this is portrayed when it doesn't involve heterosexuality, nor the strict, preconceived rules of female seduction that comes with that. I've identified two different versions of the plotline Queer Seduction as a Game Plan, which we'll deep dive into, as well as some other lovely discussions about tropes, heteronormativity, and good representation. As usual, I've divided this video into chapters. You can see them here and you can find them down below. Hi, and welcome to Obviously Queer with me, Katja. Let's get into it. Chapter 1. Queer Seduction as a Game Plan, the clean-cut version. In the first season of Mr. Robot from 2015, we meet Tyrell Wellick. Tyrell is the antagonist in the show, a quite ruthless man ready to do whatever it takes for him to become CEO. In episode 3, season 1, we see him seduce and sleep with a man from his work. This is something he does in order to hack his phone. In the first season of Halt and Catch Fire from 2014, we have Joe McMillan. Joe is one of the main characters of the show, and everything important to him is the success of his company. A company on its way to be sold to an investor he loathes. In episode 3, season 1, he therefore sleeps with the husband of said investor in order for her to end the deal. In the first season of Shadow and Bone from 2021, we have Jesper Fahey. Jesper is one of the leads in the ensemble cast and, like the others, a criminal living on the edge of society. To succeed with one of their heists, he seduces a man working in the royal stables, something he does to steal a horse and carriage. In the hit film Saltburn from 2023, we meet another goal-oriented man, Oliver Quick, who does a number of morally grey acts to climb the social ladder and gain power and influence. To get what he wants, he seduces and sleeps with character Farley, something he does in order to get into his computer. A quick disclaimer here. For this video, I've chosen 10 examples, but this is far from everyone. These 10 examples just make a manageable overview. And examples that I've come across but chosen not to include still fit very well with the two versions that I'll present and the analyses I'll make. As mentioned, I've identified two ways of portraying queer seduction as a game plan. This is the first. There is the seducer, usually male, usually bisexual, who needs something tangible, information, technology, money. He is attractive and knows how to use that to seduce and then trick the victim. Seducing someone to trick them is not a good guy act. It's therefore self-explanatory that this narrative is incorporated into storylines with already morally grey characters. These men are either antagonists, criminals, or anti-heroes. There are many similarities between the characters mentioned, but why I chose to group these together is not because they are male, bisexual anti-heroes, but because this is the unmessy version, the clean-cut queer seduction. In these examples, the plan plays out without feelings attached. Often the queer seduction is just a very small part of a much bigger plotline. It's one scene and then we move on. In many of these examples, like Joe, Jesper, and Tyrell, which we went through, this also means that the man they seduce is what you kids would call an NPC and what I would call a side character. A side character to the extent that this is their only scene. Their only purpose in the story is to play the role of the seduced. They're a narrative tool, sometimes not even named. These scenes, since they are not vital to the show's biggest story, instead serve two other purposes, both connected to character building. The first is a way to show the audience that the actions of these characters aren't always, let's call it, morally defensible. For Joe in Halt and Catch Fire, this is the first scene where we see how far he's ready to go to defend his company. The same goes for Tyrell. Both of these scenes also carry an element of shock that's not to be ignored. They are effectful scenes because we, as an audience, has read them as straight up until now. The second purpose of the scene is to establish them as queer men. So the hookup is an effectful way to tell the audience two things: that these characters are 1. queer and too selfish. In Saltburn, this is a bit different, both that Farley is an important and reoccurring character and that Felix's sexuality is more unclear from the start. But the seducing scene in itself is still a clean-cut seduction. It's quick, it has a very specific, tangible goal, and it is without feelings attached. Besides these mentioned similarities, there are two more themes that I want to address. This will be vital to this entire video. The first is power and control. In this version of the narrative, it's very clear who has the power. Even though the seducer is using their body to achieve goals, they are in control. In the older examples from the first half of 2010, this is shown in the way the sex act plays out. For Joe and Tyrell, they are physically aggressive in their seduction. It shows us they have the physical advantage. It also shows us that they top. As sexual position, we connect to power and control. In Saltburn, it becomes clear in the dialogue.
Don't make me ask again. Say it.
I'm going to behave.
In Shadow and Bone, it's shown by clearly letting it be known that Jesper enjoys the act. The second theme is success. Even though these characters might be antagonists or anti-heroes, this clean-cut queer seduction is always successful. Everything goes according to plan, and they, as people, get to where they want to be. This is also linked to control. These characters never doubted themselves and went on with the plan knowing it would work, which it does. So, queer seduction as a game plan, clean-cut version, is a queer character that seduces someone of the same gender for a tangible goal. They remain in control from start to finish and are successful in that seduction. That's the definition, in theory. But in reality, almost all examples that I could find were men seducing other men. So I thought that we would deep dive into that by simply asking, why is that? There are two terms important to understanding why this is: likability and plausibility. Plausibility always plays a role when we are portraying relationships. Plausibility in the media is always about popular culture making certain choices around casting, characteristics, and dialogue for it to feel realistic. And that's good. If a character or story doesn't feel plausible, we don't buy that story. But often plausibility is based on pre-existing norms that just doesn't get challenged. An example of plausibility in relationship that is very contemporary is Bridgerton. The 24th of May, Spectator magazine published an article in which the author said that Nicola Coughlan is simply not plausible as the friend who would catch the handsome, rich aristocrat Colin Bridgerton's eye that way. She's not shapely, which can work as sexy even in Hollywood. She's fat. Spectator's article got a lot of backlash, as it should. Times have changed since the same discourse arose around Girls 10 years ago, when basically everyone agreed Hannah would never pull character Joshua, and this storyline honestly was provoking. And the same kind of narrow-minded way of looking at relationships pervades all media. Plausibility is important, but often what's plausible and not is based on outdated ideas and prejudice. Because the unequal gender distribution when it comes to queer seduction as a game plan isn't so much about the seducer, it's about plausibility with who gets seduced. Because we see straight seduction as a game plan all the time. There are multiple named tropes for this. Sleeping the way to the top, sex for services, honey trap, or femme fatale. Endless takes on the same narrative. Women use sexuality as a tool. And the victim? A man. And as a result, we've seen many scenes where men get enchanted, tricked, and used by attractive, often quite villainized women, regardless if that's a service instead of getting paid or a spy undercover. We, generally, as a society, accept that sex is so important and so nice for men that they become stupid around it, are desperate for it, and accept it as a currency. So the step from that to the same trope, but a gay man, It's plausible. The issue with sapphic same-sex seduction as a game plan isn't mainly that it requires a woman seducing, it's that interaction demands a sapphic woman valuing or enjoying sex to the extent that she would be a little stupid about it. Female sexuality is overall seen as passive and responsive, so portrayals of men seducing women as a game plan is rare in itself. But sapphics? Two passive and responsive people using sex as a tool? Not plausible. Based on this prejudice about female and especially sapphic desire, we instead connect sapphic desire with romance. Today, to make sense of sapphic desire and to not fall into the trap of lesbian sexualization, which isn't trendy anymore, sapphic sexuality is romantic and often infantilized. In media, sapphics long and yearn for love, not sex. And that's very far from queer seduction as a game plan. So is this the only reason for the gender disparity within this narrative? Well, not the only. It's also about likability. Likability is a term I myself decided to use because identification didn't feel quite right. I don't know if it's a real term. Sue me. Viewers aren't necessarily expected to identify with these male characters I've mentioned, nor their actions they commit. But they are still portrayed as intriguing, and we are expected to like them as characters. Today, women who are anti-heroes, complex females who make bad decisions, are much more common in media. But a female anti-hero that also uses sex to her advantage and as a tool for success, much rarer. Men have a bigger playing field for what can be played while preserving general likability. He can use sex as a tool and still, undoubtedly, be in control, keep his self-worth, and therefore remain likable. A woman in the same plotline using sex for success without being questioned, judged, or corrected in the media is rarer. So are there no bisexual seductresses in contemporary media successfully seducing other women as a game plan? Well, of course there is. The exceptions that make the rule. In the second season of White Lotus, we follow hotel manager Valentina, a kind of closeted and, as we learn, inexperienced homosexual woman. One of the guests-ish at the hotel is Mia. Mia is a goal-oriented young woman, an entrepreneur, so to say, who will do what is needed of her to kickstart her singing career, including seducing and sleeping with Valentina to get her hired as the hotel performer. Mia's character in this scene is a character we've seen before, young, attractive, feminine, ambitious. That she would seduce someone for selfish interests is plausible. It's that she seduces a woman that is rare. This scene is similar to the male examples. It has a very specific, tangible goal, and it is successful. Mia is in many ways an anti-hero. She uses dirty tricks and deceives, but she still comes out of the bigger narrative a winner. Even though she uses her body as part of the game plan, she is still in control. The portrayal in White Lotus is different though, in the way that Valentina knows the outcome. She knows this is Mia's way of buying herself a spot at the piano, and Valentina still accepts it. I wanted to talk about White Lotus for a long time. Well, since 2022, but I had a hard time understanding what it was about that sapphic rep that felt so unusual. But why I was so intrigued by their characterization is because it's one of extremely few examples of sapphic sex being used as a transaction. And you might wonder why that is good rep, but it's good rep because showing a woman accepting a tangible transaction for some girl-on-girl action shows how White Lotus takes sapphic desire seriously. Valentina isn't in love with Mia, she just wants to f a woman. To do so, she accepts this transaction, as we have seen many men do, but for sapphics is very rare. And I mean, have people been online lately? One handsome butch and the dykes will give her their social security number. It is plausible that lesbians would want to sleep with another woman so bad it would make them a little stupid. Which is why the scene in White Lotus is so fun to see, an actual win for women. Chapter 2. Queer seduction as a game plan, the messy version. So now we talked about the first way of portraying queer seduction as a game plan, the clean cut way. And we also discussed the way our heteronormative views on gender and sexuality makes it rare to see sapphics in these roles. Now we will move on to the second version, the messy version. In Ozark from 2017, we meet Roy Petty, a homosexual man working for the LAPD completely without limits. To get into the crime family he investigates, he goes undercover and seduces Russ Langmore. They get into a kind of situationship. In the film Femme from 2023, we follow drag queen Jules in the aftermath of a violent physical attack. He then meets his attacker in a gay sauna who doesn't recognize Jules out of drag. Jules decides to do what it takes to get revenge, including seduction. They get into a kind of situationship. In the miniseries Mary and George from 2023, we follow Mary and her son George as they together scheme their way into power by letting George seduce the king. George and the king get into a kind of, you get it, situationship. In The Favourite from 2018, we follow the competition for Queen Anne's favourite side piece. We mainly follow Abigail, a servant, who seduces the queen in order to rise in power and climb the social hierarchy. But we also follow Lady Sarah, a worthy component and longtime partner of Queen Anne, who uses her impact on the queen as a way to control politics and war. In Gentleman Jack from 2019, Anne Lister seduces Anne Walker due to the latter having a huge fortune and the former having huge debts. They don't even have a situationship, that's a whole-ass relationship. These examples, like with the first version, have multiple things in common, which we will dissect, but the reasons these are lumped together is simply the opposite to the clean-cut version. These examples are complex, messy, and with many feelings attached. Differently from the clean-cut version, these stories can have the queer seduction as the main storyline. The seduction isn't a one-night stand. It's an intricate play with relationship as a capital, and feelings, as said, often get in the way. Where we clearly could see in the clean-cut version that the seducer has the power, here that power balance is overthrown. The messy version of queer seduction as a game plan often asks the question, who is in control here? We'll start by looking at the period dramas. When you think about it, it isn't strange that period dramas would be clearly prominent in this narrative. In all period dramas, marriage is a business proposal. Marriage was a way to climb, to get richer, to get a title. So many period dramas, even though clearly portrayed with a filter of love, is seduction as a game plan. In queer portrayals, this takes a different form since queer marriage wasn't legal, but the principle stays. In The Favourite and Mary and George, we have the head of the monarchy. Both are mentally unstable and extremely demanding. They are driven by their emotions and impulses, occasionally bad at ruling, needy, and portrayed very humoristically. On the other side, we have a younger, lower-standing character who sees an opportunity to climb, and climb they do. What is interesting with seduction as a game plan in these examples, actually in period dramas overall, is, again, the question of power. If we would use the same logic as in the clean-cut version, the person seducing should be in power. They know the rules of the game, they are the manipulators and the liars. But when one part of the relationship is the actual king, the actual queen, can someone else be in control? In Mary and George, this theme of sex as a transaction is one of, if not the, cinematic theme of the series. This is the only example I came across where this is explicitly compared to prostitution.
Tell me something. Does she pay you?
What sort of question is that?
One with a disgusting answer.
And are you above such things?
You never paid or took pay for your body. Then you buy everything with it. Or is that just me?
I think that this is a very good scene, and I want to highlight that, especially in regards to what we talked about in the previous chapter, which was likability, plausibility, and the overrepresentation of men performing queer seduction as a game plan. As mentioned previously, I believe that one of the reasons why we see so few women performing successful, clean-cut, queer seduction, where she comes out as a winner in the narrative, is because we value a woman using her body to get what she wants quite low, and a man using his body to get what he wants as like automatically a good time for him too. What queer seduction as a game plan does in this messy version is that it highlights that problem. Who is in control when one uses its body to achieve something? Why do we view that so differently depending on gender? And regardless, what is success in that scenario? In the movie Femme, we have another media which really plays with the themes of power and control. Because even though Jules is the seducer and willingly goes into the sexual acts with Preston, the sex is violent, aggressive, and clearly not enjoyable for him. Femme also uses another tool for effective storytelling, which is gender expression. Because even though some examples mentioned previously, especially the modern ones, are letting the seducer play with gender norms, Jesper has a skirt, George is referred to as a twink. They are pretty masculine at heart. And if the sex scene is shown, again, they do take the position of the top, which is how we view a sexual position of control. Jules in Femme truly plays with feminine attributes. He is a drag queen and he is a bottom. But Jules uses masculinity when the roles begin to shift and mirrors Preston's ways, mannerisms and direct quotes when Jules starts to take control. He adapts masculinity the deeper he gets into the relationship, and that performed masculinity is a way for him to take control in the relationship. But throughout, the feminine is a way for him to take control of his own life. A narrative choice that really shines light upon the pre-existing ideas on how we connect masculinity to dominant sexuality and the negative effects that can have on both ourselves and the relationships in our lives. It's a great film. You should watch it. Something else that is characteristic for the messy version of queer seduction as a game plan is that the line between love and game plan gets messy. Often these characters start to care for the person they are seducing. Lady Sarah in The Favourite is working hard to keep her relationship with the Queen going. She does so because it secures her position in court and makes it possible for her to control the outcome of the war, but there is also love there. This kind of complication is reoccurring in all of these situationships. Since all of these examples have the seduction as their main storyline, I will not spoil the endings, but I will say that throughout the success is questionable and unpredictable. Previously, I mentioned Gentleman Jack as another example of a messy queer seduction as a game plan. This example is very different from basically all other examples, but Anne is picking up the other Anne due to questions of money. What is different though is that the end goal is always a relationship. It therefore has very different things at stake, and Anne the Butch seduces Anne the Femme with love, not desire, which really is different from all other examples as queer seduction as a game plan. It fits well into our mentioned preconceived idea that lesbians are allured and yearn for love, not sex. This doesn't mean that Gentleman Jack is bad rep, it's not, but that sapphics are more common in this version of the narrative, in the messy version, with feelings involved, does highlight, once again, the issues that mainstream media have with creating sapphic one-night stands without there being feelings attached. If anyone has seen all of these examples, or many of them, you might have picked up on another set of similarities in these two different versions, which is that the majority of the characters in the clean-cut versions are, as mentioned, bisexual, and a much larger part of the characters in the messy version are homosexuals. Especially the characters being seduced, which in the messy versions are important characters. You might also have noticed that the majority of the characters in the clean-cut versions are, as mentioned, successful, in control of the situation, and portrayed more, let's say, stereotypically cool. And the characters in the messy versions are in lack of control, often lose and or die, and are to a higher degree portrayed humoristically. You could make the assumption, based on this correlation, that we portray homosexuals and bisexuals in very different lights. I think this has to do with, again, plausibility and likability, but in this case very connected to demographic. Queer seduction as a game plan, the clean-cut version, is much more taking place in media with a predominantly straight demographic. The same-sex seduction is, as mentioned, a shock scene. The queer seduction is just a small part of the journey, and it isn't supposed to change, in the broader perspective, how we as an audience feel about them. Their bisexuality is a way for them to be portrayed as wild, without limits, and well, a little bit selfish, but still cool and likable for the general audience. Because this version is so often taking place in media with an expected straight demographic, they cannot afford, in the same way, to portray gays as unlikable people. This is very clear in the examples of Joe and Tyrell. In the mid-2010s, there was a boom, I would say, in portrayals of male queerness in mainstream TV. What was interesting with these portrayals was that there were all of a sudden queer men in media that had a straight demographic, sometimes even straight male demographic. Tyrell and Joe are some of the examples, but other examples are, for example, Frank in House of Cards, Mickey and Ian in Shameless, and the movie Legend. During these years, even James Bond was hinted as having bisexual experiences.
What makes you think this is my first time?
These men could be bisexual or even gay as long as they preserved indisputable and unquestioned masculinity. It was kind of edgy. I've saved this tweet by Will I'm Not the other day. There was a magical period between 2008 and 2016 where the alt-right hadn't bled from the through of the internet into the mainstream. And your average straight white dude was becoming so much more chill about LGBT people and POC. It was genuinely a really hopeful period. And even though this tweet/comment is about the political situation more generally, this was very evident in popular culture as well. Tyrell and Joe are clear products of that trend and that slim political time, where queer anti-heroes were a way to be like woke in a cool way. In order to keep them cool though, for the general audience, they would have to be likable, successful, and masculine. Enter the clean-cut version. The same, I would argue, goes for the modern examples. That the clean-cut version has successful, likable characters isn't so much about them being bisexual, it's about them having a much more straight demographic. Queer seduction as a game plan, the clean-cut version, so aka successful bisexuals, is almost always directed and written by straight people. And to not fall into the trap of bad rep, to not portray gays that nobody likes and then get cancelled or get critiqued, these gays are more likable, they are successful, and they have more control. Queer seduction as a game plan, the messy version, is much more often taking place in queer media, with an expected queer audience. These versions, with a gay demographic, can afford other portrayals. They can afford to feature homosexuals that are straight up annoying characters, characters that don't succeed, and characters that die. Lastly, in this chapter, I would like to quickly acknowledge Ozark, who, like the examples in the clean-cut version, has a predominantly expected demographic of straight people, but still depict a messy version and still depict problematic homosexual men. For its genre and for its demographic, Ozark was unexpectedly provoking, and the queer relationship was treated similarly to the other relationships, not more or less provoking. Ozark is also alone in its depiction in other ways, such as the fact that it featured older men that are not conventionally attractive. I've spoken a bit about queer seduction as a game plan and its connection to masculinity. Here, Russ and Petty fit in. They are indisputably very masculine, so is the majority of the examples, as mentioned, especially the ones from mid-2010. But what I haven't spoken about is attractiveness. Basically because it's so intertwined with plausibility in a trope like this. Of course, the characters are attractive. They seduce to get what they want, which demands plausibility, and we connect that with attractiveness. But of course they are also attractive because I'm discussing popular culture. Mainly, as popular culture often is, American popular culture. And like ugly people and what the West deem as average-looking people are banned in the US. Banned from TV. And like, Ross and Petty aren't ugly, they just look like normal white men, which is why I love to see it. Chapter 3. Related Tropes, tvtropes.org, and heteronormativity. Before we get into the final discussion of this video, I want to talk about the related tropes, the pragmatic pansexual and the lesbian vampire. I'll do so because it's interesting, but also it's an explanation to why I haven't mentioned them in the 2 main chapters of this video. When I started to research this subject, I came across the trope the pragmatic pansexual. According to tvtropes.org, pragmatic pansexuality is when a character seduces or flirts with both men and women, or anyone else, as a means to achieve their goals, especially prevalent in works dealing with professionally seductive spies and assassins who use sex to gather intelligence and or make their kill, but can include any character who has sex with both genders for pragmatic reasons. Very similar, yeah? And to be honest, I first wrote a 13 pages long script about this trope alone. But when I started to edit it, I understood this isn't what I want to dissect at all. tvtropes.org is a site that has gotten critique for oversimplifying cinematic themes, which, well, they do, but I haven't thought about it in more detail. I mean, tropes are messy, and people often disagree with each other. I've always seen tropes, and therefore tvtropes.org, as a tool to analyze and dissect the media, but not an answer key. But the trope the pragmatic pansexual has different definitions depending on what part of the site you're reading it from. Some part says it's any character who has sex with both genders for pragmatic reasons, and another says it's a character is willing to seduce or sleep with someone whose gender doesn't align with a sexual preference to achieve their goals, which are fundamentally different things. My issue with this trope, and maybe tvtropes.org on a larger scale, is how they don't have the knowledge or tools to take into account a deeper thought about consent and heteronormativity. In their examples of pragmatic pansexuality, they name Angel Dust from Has-Been Hotel. Angel Dust is a sex worker, and not by choice. He is owned and forced into sex work by a demon from the underworld. As a part of that, he is being sold to both men and women. I think it's interesting that Angel is put as an example of a pragmatic pansexual when other sex workers are not. Why is that? Is it maybe because Angel is a man that it's seen as pragmatic pansexuality instead of what it is? Trafficking. On the site tvtropes.org, Oliver Quick from Saltburn isn't listed as a pragmatic pansexual, even though I would say he is a textbook example. Instead, he's listed as ambiguously bi or ambiguously gay. Ambiguously? I think he's just bisexual. The issue with this trope is that it's not done. It hasn't been decided if the character can be openly bisexual to fit into the trope, and the site and the people running it does not have the ability to read queer subtext enough to decide that, which makes for a categorization that is wildly heteronormative. Another related trope is the lesbian monster / the lesbian vampire. The lesbian vampire / monster is a classic, and multiple video essays has been made on the subject if you are interested to watch. The dyke vampire goes back to the novella Camilla from 1872. Camilla was not only the first lesbian vampire, she was the first female vampire ever, and one of the first vampires in fiction, period. She's inspired multiple remakes and inspired all kinds of works. Everything from Dracula's Daughter to lesbian vampire killers stems from Camilla, or so people say. And this could be seen as seducing with a game plan. Seducing to get blood or eat, like Jennifer in Jennifer's Body. But going after someone to eat them is a very different narrative than going after someone to get out or in a work deal or to climb the social ladder in a period piece. If we are to look at seduction to get blood, this is a completely different video. The male examples would look very different too. One of the key components of queer seduction as a game plan is how they use sexuality as a social power without being driven by their own lust or their own carnal craving. Even though I wanted to examine queer seduction as a game plan in a wide definition, I wanted to examine this up-and-coming, goal-oriented human. Chapter 4. End discussion. predatory gaze and good representation. With the popularity and buzz of Saltburn, but also other works I haven't mentioned, like the remake of Ridley, the second season of Interview with a Vampire, and the super hyped show Hazbin Hotel, the 2020s are witnessing what many call a wave of gay villainy. Rowan Ellis pretty recently released her video essay, Queer Villains and the Death of Media Literacy. New York Times published the article, Yes, These Gays Are Trying to Murder You, proclaiming that we're witnessing an explosion of out and proud gay villainy. Even Sweden's biggest newspaper, Dagens Nyheter, published an essay about this new villain homo. It's trendy with villains, and it's trendy to talk about gay villains. That discussion fueled this video. Many of the videos, articles, and TikToks discussing this topic do so with the focus of problematic representation. Is this characterization of gay and bisexual people harming the group? Are the viewers able to understand by themselves that this character isn't a realistic portrayal of the everyday bisexual? I can't really make this video and not address this discussion. Is queer seduction as a game plan good rep? Is this predatory homosexual? Problematic? If you are new to this channel, welcome, especially if you are watching this far. If you are old to this channel, you know I want my gays in prison. I enjoy representation that is angsty, toxic, and obsessive. There are, of course, damaging and stupid representation, like J.K. Rowling's horror novels about trans women killing cis women in bathrooms, or whatever that book was about. The predatory aspect of queerness, that queerness is a danger to the children, and the harmful stereotypes of homosexuals who corrupt and destroy the pure mind, have been more or less transferred from homosexuals to trans people. The villains to conservatism and traditionalism today aren't homosexuals in the same way. It's transsexuals. This unfortunately affects what we can represent in a good way. If large and dangerous conservative groups believe trans women attack people in bathrooms, maybe that's not what we should represent in the media. Maybe that is harmful. But with gay men, bisexuals, and gay women, we have a bigger leeway. I know there is a new wave of moral panic among youths, especially on TikTok, but I find it quite easy to determine when a character is gay as a way to make them unlikable and when they are just being gay and doing unlikable things. If the discussion is important to you, ask yourself, is this character a predator because the creator thinks gays are predatory, or is this actually just fun? I've recently read the Dune trilogy. In it, we have one of history's most crystal clear examples of a predatory gay, Baron Vladimir Harkonnen. The Baron is created to be the most evil person in the universe. To make the reader dislike him, he is obese, a pedophile, and gay. He lusts for his much younger male nephew. With little media literacy, you can understand he is all of these things and carries this desire to make him unlikable. With little research, you can understand that the author carried these opinions himself. When Dune was made into a movie in the 20s, they chose to erase the Baron's sexuality completely because it's tainted with homophobia. In the 20s, we also saw the character of Quentin in HBO's White Lotus, a gay, middle-aged man who lies, murders, and sleeps with his much younger male nephew. The difference between these portrayals is context. The context makes the representation. White Lotus is directed by a gay man. Several queer characters are featured. All sexualities, even the straights, in White Lotus carry major issues and play out different questions of power and taboo. Quentin is not created out of disgust from the creators themselves, but to create an uncomfortable feeling, to shock for sure, but not with ill intent. His character is also, though unredeemable, fun. If the only type of gay on TV was scheming bisexuals and predatory gay men, it would be an issue. But men today have a wide variety of rap. That problematic and even predatory gays are visible in that pile is good. actually. Gays will not get a bad rep just because Oliver slurps bathwater like a madman, nor that Quentin f***s his nephew, but gays will get a bad rep if morally correct besserwissers starts telling other gays what they can and cannot enjoy on TikTok. Representation in these modern times is starting to be a little washed out. Like, what is representation in the year of 2024? While writing this script, I've written this script for a long time, I watched Challengers. Challengers has a scene in it where Patrick, played by Josh Connor, goes on Tinder. He does this because he is broke and has nowhere to sleep, so he needs a hookup. Seduction with a game plan. He goes on a date with this girl, Helen, who kind of gets he's using her, but still takes him home. As mentioned, this kind of portrayal is still rare. She is so thirsty, she doesn't care he's homeless and using her. And TikTok loved this. People were so horny for that film and so horny for Josh Connor, so Helen became an important character. She mirrored the audience. You know, she's me, relate, I'm Helen, and so on. People thought it was just so fun that she was just like them. I'm mentioning this because I think this is a very good example of representation. Small, micro representation that just brings joy. Imagine that Seduction with a game plan can bring that much joy. Just because it's done differently. I think that by zooming in to specific narratives, by looking at specific parts of representation, we can easily see the bigger picture. Queer Seduction as a game plan is a minor narrative, but it still mirrors what major issues we have with queer portrayals today. In my last video, I lifted the rising trend of what I call aggressive lesbians. Horny, morally grey, secure in their lesbianism and taken seriously by the narrative and their creators. That aggressive lesbian is a vital step on the journey to seeing more cool dykes sleeping with someone to hack their phone. It's time. I mean, we've all been there. No? If you watched this entire video, thank you so much. I would love to hear your opinion about this, so please leave a comment, a thumbs up, or a little subscription. I upload like 2-3 times a year, so it's not like you're going to be bombarded with content. So you can just subscribe for support. If you want to talk to me between that, you can always reach me by email, on Goodreads, and on TikTok. Thank you again, and I will see you around eventually.